Hey guys, it's Sam, and this is my spoiler-free review of Reincarnation Blues by Michael Poore. This is a standalone adult fantasy story. It follows our main character of Milo, and he is a man that has been reincarnated thousands of times. And so he has had many, many different lives, and throughout his time he has also fallen in love with a certain incarnation of death. So in the story, we follow Milo through a lot of his lives, have flashbacks to some of his lives, because at this point he's actually running out of lives. You can only reincarnate so much because you're trying to reach almost like a nirvana, but they don't call it that in here. And if you run out of time and don't reach it in a certain amount of lives, you're done. So first off, before we get started, there's a number of trigger warnings in this book that I want to point out. There is rape, torture, gore, violence against animals. I think that's the majority of them. And those all pop up in different parts of the story because this book shows multiple different lives, and that if you're living thousands and thousands of lives, not all of those lives are going to be good. But some of these things are very in your face, so please be warned if you're sensitive to any of those topics. They're going to pop up in detail at certain points of the story. So first off, I'm going to talk about the world building. This is fun because it has one of my favorite tropes in that people do travel to the underworld or to death. So between lives, Milo spends time in the afterlife. And there is river imagery at certain points because people have to kind of go into the river to be reborn. So that's fun. And depending on what kind of life you lead, when you're in the afterlife waiting for your next life, it shows the housing that you have, and the place you're allowed to be is dependent on how your life was. So that's kind of fun because it has very modern technology but in the afterlife. So if you lead just kind of a mediocre existence, you're gonna just have a mediocre apartment. If you led a really good life, you're gonna have this mansion. It's just kind of a funny take on that sort of heaven, mentality that people have as far as if you lead a good life, you're gonna have a great afterlife and things like that. Next, I'm gonna talk about our characters. The main characters that we focus on are obviously Milo and then this incarnation of death. They do imply that there are many different kinds of death, but he is in love with, I believe her name is Sophie, and so you kind of follow them the most. But obviously Milo is the main character. So what's fun about this is, again, you have numerous different lives that Milo is leading, and he is not always he's not even always a person. You can obviously be reincarnated as animals and things like that, and so you kind of get to follow all these different lives. You get flashbacks to lives that he led at one point, and what's kind of cool about that too is that this also implies that time is not linear, so he will lead lives that are actually in the past or the distant future, and kind of bump back and forth, and it's not really oh, the next life is going to be at a certain time point. So that's kind of fun. So you get to see Milo as a person throughout with this distinct personality, but at the same time his personality changes to reflect what life he's in, because when you're reincarnated you don't necessarily remember everything from your past lives. Because Milo has lived so many past lives, some of the voices of his past lives are getting through to him in the current lives that he's leading. But this book also shows that if Milo goes into a new life with a certain feeling, that's going to kind of tinge the new life. So that's when we see some of these darker stories. So this book kind of balances some of the lighter good lives with the bad lives. You do at some points follow Milo not being a good person. So there's one life in particular where he's basically building up to be a serial killer. He is a sociopath, he's torturing animals, but then you have other points where he's following renowned religious leaders and living a very humble good life, and you have other points where he's just kind of being this neutral wise guy kind of thing. Or you have him in the future in dystopian type future. So you have all these different things, which is really fun. But you still have Milo as a character that you are rooting for. The times when you have him in these bad lives, you're just please get out of this because I can't root for you in this moment. But you want to, and you're kind of left waiting to see what's going to happen with him and with his relationship with Sophie. Again, it's this relationship formed over thousands of years, obviously, of interaction and things. So that's interesting as well. You don't have us following her really as a character. You have her at some points, but you don't really see her as much. It really is Milo's story. But later on, she gets woven in a lot more with some of the plot things that are going on. So lastly, let me talk about the plot. It is just a fun story if you sort of non-linear stories, as far as some of these flashbacks into different lives and things like that. You will have chunks of lives that you'll learn a lot more about, and then some that are like just barely mentioned. So this is a book that definitely could have been huge because you could have had all these different lives explored, but I think Michael Poore kept it pretty succinct, which is nice. And you are just left wondering like what's gonna happen. Is he gonna, you know, is he gonna get to this like nirvana state, and what does that mean? And what does that mean for his relationship with Sophie? Because if he moves on, then his relationship with death changes because he's no longer dying, right? So it kind of explores all of that. There is a plot point that I do want to mention along with these sort of like trigger warnings, in that there is a life in which Milo is falsely accused of rape. I did not like how the author handled that because they never really rectified the fact that like rape allegations and accusations that are false are very, 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 very uncommon. And that, and then he gets also convicted of this, and that affects that life. And also that doesn't happen, right? Like we know that statistically, factually, actual rapists do not get convicted. So rapists that are falsely accused most likely are not convicted either. And rapists' lives are not just like destroyed. So that's just a really irritating thing, because it also implies that women are frequently falsely accusing men of rape, and that the therapists and mental health professionals that were working with this woman were like stupid and all this stuff. And I'm just like, don't like how you handled that. That was not a good way to handle that at all. Overall, I did enjoy the story. If you can handle the weird bits, some of the missteps with the plot points, and some of the like grossness and trigger warnings and stuff like that, I do really like some of the other themes and some of the parts with like the good lives and love and things like that. So I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars, which is interesting because there were times like I wasn't always enjoying this book because of the really like gross or difficult content, but it had so many things that I do like as far as like relationships with death and the underworld and reincarnation and things like that, that I did end up overall really enjoying it. I think it's also a really interesting book to discuss or buddy read, so if you have the opportunity to do that, I would definitely recommend that because there's so many things that you can really dig into with this book. So like I said, 4 out of 5 stars. So comment down below, let me know what you thought of Reincarnation Blues. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you other guys soon. Bye.